It was a process because the female figurine was found in multiple pieces, right? And it came out over a few days. But the first time it was put together, it was still missing one of the breasts. And if you know the figurine well, it has very full breasts, also the legs are open, you see the vulva very clearly. But when the second breast with the fingers, right, the second breast with the fingers on it, for me, what I really remember are the fingers, right? Because, in a way, the breasts are very full and it's kind of a simple form, of course, with the lines, but the fingers were engraved with such incredible care, right? And so I always think of it as I'm not a woman. I've been in a hospital for births, but it's like, so you're like after a really good meal or something kind of good's happened when you hold your hands up here, and I think it's a depiction of a woman after giving birth. But for me, you might know when you compare the female figurine from Hohlefels to other depictions, often the Ice Age female depictions have sometimes a depressed body language, right? The head is down, but this female figurine is, very open and very expressive. And I always think of it again from the male point of view. It's like after the way you feel after a good meal or doing something substantial. I see the female figurine from Hohlefels. There are actually two. One is just a breast with the fingertips, but the two we have seem to show the same pattern. And the one that we have is interesting. It's totally obvious. It's not a portrait of any kind. That is clear, right? If I saw you again in life, if I don't see your face, there is no way I would know who you are. If there's no face on an image, it's not about an individual, for sure, right? And there's not even no face, there's no head. So we know that this is not a depiction of a specific individual. It's much more a depiction of something very different than that. And at least when I look at Ice Age art, what I would always ask is what is depicted and what is absent. And I think this is a good way of looking at it, right? If you're just you're in a schoolroom listening to some boring lecture, you just scribble something, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But if you're forming a shape with stone artifacts out of a hard material like ivory, every single cut you make is a lot of work, right? You don't just casually create a form. It's a deliberate shaping of the object that gives you the specific form. Every single line you scratch into the surface is a lot of work. You have to apply a lot of force and go over and over in these engravings. So what we can safely say is it is not chance, right? Any aspect of the figurines or horses or mammoths or whatever the image, lion, men, it's not chance. That's one thing we can be sure of. So if we accept the point that it's not chance, it's deliberate, it's intentional, and it's done with care and with the application of a lot of force and knowledge, then we can say what is depicted. Well, what is depicted? Well, let's stick with what's not depicted. The legs are scarcely depicted at all. There's no feet. So just like it's not an individual, this depiction of a female is not about locomotion or movement, right? This person is not moving around the landscape, right? Otherwise they'd have feet, they'd have legs. And instead they're just little pointy, stubby feet. What is there? The enormous breast, very full breast, like for a woman lactating. Also the spread legs with the very pronounced vulva. You would see that particularly after birth, right? And what also is the case is sometimes you read that the figurine's pregnant, but that is not the case, right? The stomach, in fact, is very flat. I think it's a female depiction shortly after birth. And I think that it's something that has to do with, broadly speaking, this context where it would be in the realm of female reproduction, in the realm of accompanying female reproduction, midwifery in a Paleolithic context, in a hunter-gatherer context. And I would also say from a theoretical point of view, we could always ask ourselves, if we pose a question, the answer to the question is going to depend on how we look at that question. And when we deal with Paleolithic archaeology and human evolution, we often use an evolutionary perspective. Why? Because over long periods of time, millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, what really matters is that we have fertile offspring, right? One generation without fertile offspring, and there are no more people left. So the one thing we can be 100% sure about is that reproduction has to work, right? And if you imagine small groups of a society that doesn't reproduce is gone, right? Very, very quickly. So all of human evolution is in part creating a situation where reproduction works, where offspring come to life and are healthy and are able to reproduce themselves. That's true of all species. The only difference is humans are intellectually engaged in these processes, at least when we come to sophisticated modern humans like ourselves. So that, to me, is very, very important. And the other thing to think about when we put this question in an evolutionary context is we know there are a lot of arguments that we're talking about small groups of mobile hunters and gatherers that probably moved into Central Europe at a very early date along the Danube. At least it's the easiest way to get here. And if you imagine that you're in a group of a few families, maybe 20, 30, or a few more people, if you lose a man, it's not the end of the world. But if you start losing women in reproductive age, that is the thing that's really going to be a problem from a demographic point of view. And from a biological perspective and an evolutionary perspective, losing women in their reproductive years is the one thing that cannot happen. Because if you're in a small group and that happens a few times, you're not going to make it. And so I think knowledge of reproduction is super important. And these terms that are thrown around, which I have no problem with, right? Fertility, reproduction, sexuality, all of these things go together. And from my point of view, are consistent with a biological evolutionary approach to life in the past. I've worked on so many sites from so many different periods. I would say one can have a different theoretical point of view on these things. You can look at the past as something that's very familiar to you, or you can look at the past as something exotic and very, very different. And when we see that when we think about Neanderthals or early humans, you can look at them and say, life back then was very different. I would say for these early modern people of the ordination, that at the end of the day, what I always say is they were almost certainly like us, right? We know they had music, they had art, they had all sorts of sophisticated tools. They, of course, spoke a different language, but if you or I could go back to Hohlefels 40,000 years ago, we'd have to learn some things. We'd have to get much better at knapping stone and hunting reindeer and horses and tanning hides and doing many other things to live on the Ice Age landscape. But the people would be like us. We'd need to learn their cultural codes, how behavior would be interpreted, but I think it would ultimately be familiar. The dreaming, yeah, I would say from a physiological point of view, I would strongly suspect that the dreaming would be much like we dream. In our own lives, we have sort of the physical reality and a rational level of dealing with things, right? I would say for most of my job, I'm dealing with sort of rational, practical things. What time do I have to be here? What do I have to do? I have to write an article. I have to give a lecture. I have to go shopping, cook my dinner, right? And so that tends to be at the practical level of life. But obviously, there are many different levels of looking at the world around you, experiencing the world around you. And just like for us, it's easy to, if you're open to it, imagine traveling in your thoughts to other places, right? And for me to travel back 40,000 years ago, or 50 or 60 or 70,000 years ago at Hohlefels is very easy, right? I mean, I know all about this way of traveling because I know the site so well and have a sense for the people who lived here. But I think beyond that, we can travel in all sorts of places with our thoughts. And I think that's what makes being a human being so nice, right? We're not, what people say, you could be a criminal or convicted of a horrible crime in Italy, you're put in a tiny jail, but as long as you're healthy and your mind is free and you get enough to eat and you're not tortured, maybe, I'm not saying it would be good, but you could still survive. And I think that, in the Ice Age, these people were very in tune to the world around them, right? They'd see an animal, and of course they'd see a reindeer. Oh, that's a reindeer. But they'd know so many things about the reindeer. There would be stories about the reindeer. They would have hunted and eaten reindeer. They would have clothing made from reindeer. And the relationship with the world around them, whether it's a cave or living organisms or other people, of course, was very, very complex. With art, when people say, oh, what does it mean, right? Any good art is not one-dimensional, right? It's obvious, right? If you go to a bad film, then there's nothing to talk about, right? Something happened and it's not really art, it's just some banal story. But if you go to a good film and somebody says, hey, Andrea, what did you think about this? Well, I don't know. There's some things we have to talk about or we could address, because there are multiple layers of meaning in practically everything we do, and certainly in any good art. And you see that in every tradition, right? The Christian tradition, right? The Virgin Mary is a million different things to a million different people, right? There to help you, but maybe something to respect, and many other things happening simultaneously, let alone all kinds of other examples we could give. And what we have to realize is, in a world 40,000 years ago, where, let's say, a rational scientific view of the world didn't exist, right? People didn't know 40,000 years ago why the sun went up in the morning, didn't know why winter came, why it rained, why it didn't rain. All these things that we know today through scientific examination were not known. So the phenomenon would be known, but the reason from an empirical point of view would not be known. So you can be sure there would be a universe of ideas about that. Why did the snow come? Why did we have a good hunt? Why did we have a bad hunt? Why did the baby die after birth, or the mother shortly after birth? Why did anything happen? Why do I experience love or hate? Why did I hurt myself today? Why did someone drown in the river? All of these things were almost certainly embedded in a universe of ideology. And those kinds of information are very difficult for us to capture. We're much better at capturing what time of year was a site used, how was an animal hunted, what was a stone tool used for. But it's completely clear once we move into a symbolic realm with people with the intellectual sophistication that we have, there's the physical reality, but also a universe of ideas, and people lived in this universe of ideas just as much as in the physical reality, much like we do too. But I would venture to say that the world of ideas then was even more interesting, right? Because now the world of ideas is kind of penned in by the scientific observations, right? Because we know a lot. We know why the sun goes up in the morning. We know why it goes down at night. When someone dies, we usually know why they die. When good things happen, you usually know. When bad things happen, we usually have some idea why it happened. But back then there were lots of things that had no rational scientific explanation. So probably all of those areas were things where there were, or topics where there were stories and ideas and myths. And so I expect from that point of view, life was much richer than today. When we consider humanity and how people interacted with each other, it's a complicated issue. I think that has always its cultural context, right? There's situations where people show each other great hospitality. There's situations where people are very cautious and very suspicious, or even aggressive or violent, right? And I don't think one can generalize about that aspect of life. I think one can make some interpretations or guesses or speculation. What one often would claim is that in low population density, maybe you'd be open to meeting other people because there were so few people on the Ice Age landscape. I see you, I say, hey, Andrea, who are you? Where do you come from? What brought you here? At the same time, that curiosity and welcoming might also be accompanied by caution. Right? Why are you here with these people in our area? Are you going to take something from us? Are you going to help us? Are you going to hurt us? I think it's very difficult to generalize about how that would have been, other than to say that on an open Ice Age landscape where there are very few people, to meet anyone would almost certainly be pretty exciting, right? And if you probably knew your neighbors, and I'd see someone on the horizon, say, oh, that could be so-and-so from that group, then I'd probably say, okay, that's interesting. I'll watch a little longer and check it out and get near, and at some point say, oh, hi, yeah, that's Andrea. We'll, chat for a bit. On the other hand, if you felt that the presence of people was threatening, you'd probably be very cautious and maybe very elusive. So I think the relationship of how people treated strangers is something we can't generalize about. If you were very optimistic, you might say, well, people were probably mostly cool and generous with each other, but I think that's speculation. We can't prove it. We can prove beyond reasonable doubt that often people cared for the sick, but to be honest, I don't think that's so special, right? If you spend your life with your brother, your partner, your parents, the child, of course you're going to try to take care of them. I mean, if you can. I mean, at some point you can't help and people die. I suspect that in certain circumstances, the emotional investment might not have been quite as high as in other societies. If you're dealing with risk all the time, we know childbirth in pre-industrial societies was a situation where, loss of life, the mother or the child, could be pretty common. One was probably emotionally ready for those kinds of challenges, which gets back a little bit to the female figurine. Why a female figurine? And I think there, it's important to realize that giving birth is a very risky thing, right? There are a lot of things can go wrong for the child and also for the mother. And knowledge about how to negotiate this probably most dangerous situation a woman and a child would ever encounter in their lives would be really important. But of course, every mother knows about it, right? You can't give birth without experiencing it. Of course, there are a lot of hormones at play. But then if you imagine an older woman who's accompanied births and has seen quite a few births, probably has seen cases of perhaps in unfortunate situations dying or suffering quite a bit, and maybe learned how to respond to that. Also, if you are something like a Paleolithic midwife or someone who accompanies births, and I think for a midwife, or something like a midwife, someone who's experienced these extreme situations, they know when the situation's hopeless, when the situation could be saved, how to deal with it. And I think that was a very intense part of life, especially in the female social units, right? It's information that would also be passed from generation to generation. The question of whether the society was a matriarchy or patriarchy, I don't know. Yeah, it's possible. But what we can say is that female life was important, and in the realm of reproduction, and particularly in the realm of birth, that's always going to be a woman's environment, where the women are probably the critical people. And in a very schematic way, I would envision a female representation like this being passed down through the female line, from a grandmother to a daughter to a granddaughter, and keeping in circulation. And it's fascinating that we have two of these figurines from here and none anywhere else. And again, I would personally emphasize the demographic aspects. But I'd like to get back to the point about the multi-levels of meaning, right? It would be a big mistake to think that we would look at an artwork in the Paleolithic and say, oh, this has one meaning, right? And that's my gripe with people who say, oh, what does it mean? It means lots of things, right? We can all think of situations where objects, material culture, we know has many layers of meaning. And a female figurine, of course, can be viewed in the human biological context of reproduction. But then we were here in Holdefels when the lights were off, right? And it's kind of cold in here, and when it's dark, it's not really that nice. And so if you can imagine, you spend a winter here, and it's cold. It's really cold. It's cold here in the winter, and in most parts of the Ice Age, it was a lot colder then, 10 degrees colder, much colder. And so then finally, gradually you realize the days are getting a little longer. You hear some birds singing you don't hear in the winter. You realize, some of the snow and ice has started to melt, you know? There are drips, the animals are behaving differently. And at some point the snow's gone, and you see the green grass starting to come up, and like we talk about the mammoth steppe and certain aspects of how the ecosystem in the past worked. But if you lived in that ecosystem, the feeling you would get when you see the grass growing and flowers coming up and all these things, of course you'd have an emotional response, but you'd also have a rational response. You would know this grass and photosynthesis and the changing of the seasons is the essential essence of life, right? Because if there are no plants, there are no animals, and there are no people, and you have no chance whatsoever. And eventually, it's warm enough, you spend more time out of the cave, you're not just going out to get food and special resources. And fertility and reproduction is not just a human biological process, but it's dictating the whole world around you. And I much prefer to think of any of our artworks, including the female figurines, in a much broader context, and not just pinned down to something very specific. But if you were to pin me down, I would put it more in this female, biological, reproductive, birth environment. But I think it would be a big mistake to view it as something that exists in a vacuum, only in that area. But also think about the Vogelherd horse or the Vogelherd mammoth. Those are not just toys. Those are works of incredible beauty, right? I mean, those artworks, if they were produced today, would be mind-blowing, right, as sculptures. And I am sure I would say with the female figurine and the lion men, we have a little more insight. It's a little easier to interpret them. With the animals, there are a lot of different possible hypotheses. But I do not think they're toys. I do not think they're trivial objects. I think they're things that were produced with great care by very skilled artists, and I think they had an enormous amount of meaning. And if you had the Vogelherd horse or Vogelherd mammoth with you, if you showed it to someone or passed it on to a child or another person you knew or met, that would be something very, very meaningful. It wouldn't be a trivial activity at all. And just, again, imagine the amount of free time people had. On average, the life was short, but we know hunters and gatherers might have had a difficult life. They didn't have that much material wealth, and you only need so many hours to feed yourself and to make all the things you need. And it is true if you're living a mobile lifestyle, accumulating things doesn't help you. So probably the world of thoughts and stories and art and music, all of these things were almost certainly very rich, and we know that from every ethnographic study from the recent past. Well, we have painted rocks, but we don't have painted walls. We have a number of fragments from the walls that have a bit of red color on them, but never clear depictions. And one reason is that the walls are breaking down all the time. But my opinion on that is that the preservation of, once you put ochre on a rock, it really stays on nicely, right? We have lots of painted pebbles and painted objects. And the ochre, when you find that, and even in the museums, if you go to the Urgeschichtliches Museum, you'll see the color is very clear. And so any painting from the wall that fell into the ground and was buried would also have the same kind of preservation. So we look pretty carefully at all the rocks we find, the stone that has broken from the wall. If painting the walls of the cave was a common activity, we would have found them. So I think in our region it wasn't typical. So they preferred other forms of communication. I've worked on many sites in North America, many sites in Europe, in the Near East, in Africa. And maybe I'm lucky, maybe I have some insight into how to go about doing these things, but what interests me much more is the process, right? One thing I know, whatever's there, we're going to find, and I know how to do it. So I'm very much interested in the professional nature of how we do our work. It's mental, it's physical, but it's also a thing of beauty, right? And that's what I think in excavation is also a thing of beauty. If you're working together with a shared goal and it's fun, right? I always say we should enjoy it, right? If you're not, I would tell anybody who's worked with me on Dig would say, look, if there's some place you'd rather be, no problem, just go. You know, I'd rather be with, 5 people who are really happy and motivated about being here than 50 people who aren't. And I really think it's important, if you follow the process and do a good job, and you don't rush it, and you know what you're doing, the reward will come. And I think that's true of many things, right? I think, sure, there's a time, sometimes you're in a situation where you're under some pressure and you work faster than usual, sure. There might be other times where things are a little more relaxed than usual, but the main thing is you just stick to it and you deal with it. You suck it up and you do what's necessary. And if you know what you're doing, the reward will come. Of course, if you make a whole range of poor decisions, you might waste a lot of time. But so far, fortunately, I haven't had that problem. I would say, in general, I really can't think of any excavation that was disappointing for me. And beyond that, I would say, with very few exceptions, all of the discoveries from my excavations have gone so far beyond what I ever would have thought about. If somebody had asked me in 2008, I never, even a long time ago, I never said I had any hopes for finding anything. Whatever comes, comes. But I would never in a million years have dreamed of finding 2 female figurines, a nearly complete flute right next to each other. Right, that was also in the year before we had a big exhibit planned. And when I look back at all of these discoveries, many, many finds. Oh, I could name many things. The little lion man, or the phallus from Hohlefels, or many. I could name dozens of things. The reward was always so much greater than I expected, right? And I would say that's typically the case. Not every day, not every week, not even every season. Although this site, there has never been a bad season. I've been on other sites where, you say, okay, it wasn't our best season, but we're coming back and we're going to continue. But we have never had a disappointing season here. And when you were on the excavation just today, you could see that we've now come down on these rich Neanderthal layers. Last year was the first time we had rich Neanderthal deposits. And right now, if we go look at the site, you can see all those stone tools and animal bones and burnt bones. So this is going to be a good year for Neanderthals, for sure. And we're just getting started. This is the first week of excavation. We still have organization layers from the early modern humans. We'll also be digging Gravettian layers. All I can say is this is the 25th year. We have never had a bad year of excavation here. As we move through time, it's not the case that everything happens gradually. And what's very unusual about the sites in this region like Hohlefels is that in the same horizon we have the earliest figurative depictions, musical instruments, personal ornaments, pterianthropic images, these lion men mixed depictions. So these are 4 kinds of objects that really come into the material cultural record, as far as we can tell, at very close to the same time. I'm a little hesitant to say quantum leap because we're always looking at such a small picture of life in the past, right? And certainly there must be a lot of other important things happening in a lot of other places. But if we look in our region, ornaments with a 3-dimensional form, they're much older examples of pierced natural objects like shells, for instance, or teeth. But to have a situation where the shape of an ornament is completely artificial and completely man-made, that we have at the same time as the earliest flutes. And the flutes are not just one kind of flute. They're flutes from vulture bones, from geese, from swans, different kinds of flutes made from ivory. And I'm sure you both have experience as sculptors at some level. To make a flute out of a solid material like ivory, that is really skill. And so and then the pterianthropic imageries, these mixed human-animal depictions, they all come about at the same time, which suggests that there are thresholds. And I think once this threshold into a symbolic world is there, there's every reason to assume we've got complicated speech talking about the here and now, the past, the future, the feelings one has, as well as the empirical, tactile things. People could almost certainly talk about ideas. Music has a universe of possibilities, not just entertainment, but also ideology, spiritual things as well. Also the personal ornaments. It's clear that in this valley, the Ak Valley and the Lona Valley, they're making the exact same kinds of ornaments, and these ornaments are unknown anywhere else in the world, right? So if you lived in the Ak Valley and you traveled to the Lona Valley, you'd probably have the same language, and you'd see them. You might not know the person's name, but maybe you would, and you'd see their stuff, and you would quickly realize, they speak our language. These people have ideas very similar to ours. You probably would know them because it's not so far away, and that would be a level of communication between groups and individuals that would be very familiar to us, in the sense that if you're traveling in Italy, you stop at what are they called, autostrada, to get a pasta or whatever, and you talk to somebody you've never seen in your life. You see them, hey, they're pretty good pasta or whatever. Let's get a glass of Chianti and talk for a bit. You could relate to them, and you might not like each other, but there was some bond. And I think that it's very clear in this area we have a very high density of specific symbolic artifacts, right? The Lion Man. We have a Lion Man from here. That, by the way, is the only find I actually found myself. Right? And I saw that, and wow, that's a Lion Man. That really got my attention, because at that moment it became clear that the Lion Man from Hohenstein-Stadel is not just a fluke, it's part of a system of beliefs. So I would argue that between the Lion Man from Hohlefels, the Lion Man from Hohenstein-Stadel, and the likely Lion Man from Geisenkloster, we have three of these objects that pretty much prove that a transformation from human to animal, from real to spiritual, is a fundamental aspect of the lives of these people, which I would say is the first proof of religion, right? And the earlier burials that might be proof of some kind of belief in a netherworld or some world beyond our own world, one could make a case for earlier examples of that. But in terms of a spiritual understanding of the world around us, I think that probably goes fairly far back in time, but we can really prove with the depictions of things that don't exist in the real world, but only in the world of ideas and probably ideology, that we're getting into some pretty sophisticated aspects of life that, to me at least, tell me that people living here 40,000 years ago were every bit as sophisticated as we are. In the capitalist world, time is money, right? You go to work, most jobs, maybe not as artists, maybe not as archaeologists, thankfully. You go in, you have your punch card, and the guy who's paying you knows, okay, you arrived at 7:42 and can leave after eight hours, gets half an hour for lunch or whatever. And that idea of measuring the passage of time actively every day, right? The store opens, the store closes, you have your lunch break, you have to be somewhere at a very specific time, and your whole life is filled with these sorts of things. And for many people, everything about their lives is governed by measurement of time. And I think among hunters and gatherers in general, and I think also here, I think time was probably a more fluid concept, right? There were periods of time, I can think of the long winters in this cave. Outside, it's really cold. You've got your food, you've got your hides, you've got some fire, you're doing all right, and you got a lot of time, right? But then there might be other times, right? You're out, gathering, and you need to get your materials quickly. So because there's a pressing matter you need to attend to, maybe you need to move the group from one place to another. You can imagine also hunting, right? If you're hunting, there are periods of waiting, right? There are a lot of ethnographic examples. The hunt is waiting. Even in modern hunting, even with guns, you're there waiting a lot. But then when it counts, you're there focused and you get the job done. And so I would guess that in the past, the passage of time was a much, much more fluid concept, right? Usually, unless we're really relaxed, we're thinking tick, 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 the seconds go by, the seconds leads to minutes, the minutes lead to hours, and then the day's gone. Day only has 24 hours, we've got to get to bed, got to wake up, got to do all these things. Yeah, there was a time and a place for that, but in general, among hunters and gatherers, that kind of being owned by the clock was not the case.